2 wins in 3 games for the UConn Huskies, including a win at home against a Power 5 program in Virginia. We bring in Amon Kidwai from Rivals to help us break down the UConn Huskies as they take on Syracuse in a basketball feel, old Big East feel from the football standpoint as well. Amon, thanks for joining us as always.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
You know, the one situation involving the season thus far, unfortunately, in a loss that caught a lot of national attention as people were floating around from game to game a couple weeks ago, was the Navy game. UConn with a chance to pull off an upset against a very respected foe. 28-24 ball game, drove the length of the field, got into good position. And what happened? There's some conflicting arguments in regards to who's at fault here and exactly what happened, why they didn't pass, why they ran the football the last play of the game and ran out of time.
Sure. So UConn, to set the stage a little bit, they have first and goal from the 10. Okay, and there's about there's a little more than 17 seconds left in the game, and then they complete a pass to the 1. Receiver goes out of bounds. Clock keeps running once they set the ball, and so here's where it gets dicey. Diaco, head coach Bob Diaco said that they weren't sure what the situation was. They weren't sure about the distance, whether it was a catch, things like that, and that's why they weren't able. He didn't think that they were going to get that playoff on second down before the play clock ran out, and that's why he burned the final timeout. So they burned their final timeout. There's 17 seconds left. They have the ball at the 1 or the half-yard line, and then at this point, Diaco decides, or whoever, the offensive coordinator perhaps, decides that they think that they can get 2 plays off in 17 seconds with no timeouts. And that in and of itself makes some sense. I mean, if you call a pass on that first play, but they didn't. They called a run. The run was stuffed, and they weren't able to get another play off in time. Diaco said they called 2 plays in the huddle. Of course, hindsight is 2020. That running back strolls through, and it's potentially a genius call for not doing what the defense expected. We definitely saw in Super Bowl 49 with the Seahawks what could happen if you pass in this situation. So I think it's pretty clear that the coaches did not manage this end of the game situation properly, though some of the decisions are defensible. You'd hope that the coaches can find a way to, in the future, put the players in a better chance to win, or in a better situation to be able to capitalize on what could have been a very successful situation.
First time I saw the sequence, and specifically the last play, I didn't necessarily know if the players knew. They didn't necessarily, all of them, respond as though they knew that it was that frantic or urgent of a situation. Obviously, unless you're directly handling the football as the center and the quarterback, those 2 players, you can only do so much. You can only line up yourself and get ready. But it didn't appear, at least the first time I saw it, as though maybe everyone knew that it was that urgent and they had just basically blown the game. But that aside, they lose to Navy 28-24. If you look at the effort, they're going toe-to-toe with one of the better teams in the conference, expected one of the better teams in the conference. They beat Virginia. Virginia misses a field goal late. They gut out a 13-10 win. If we look at the offense, Brian Sharef's with a historic, for program history, effort against Navy, 23 of 26 in that game, 71% overall. I guess Arkeel Newsome, not with the kind of numbers that I would expect after 3 games. He does lead the team in rushing from the running back position, 130 yards, 3.5 yards per carry. So, Amon, your thoughts about the offensive performance through 3 games?
We've seen flashes of things that can be good. The coaches came into this season saying that this would be a run-heavy, pro-style kind of offense, and frankly, they just don't have the offensive line to pull that off. And so what we saw in the second half of the Navy game was they decided to change that strategy, and they opened it up a little bit. So they started running more four wide. They started spreading it out. They started, doing quicker passes, get the ball out of the quarterback's hands quickly so as to mitigate the weakness of the offensive line, and it worked pretty well. They tried to do more of the same against Virginia, but with less success. And so it looks like the offensive strategy is adjusting on the fly. They certainly have the playmakers to pull it off. I think the UConn offense has been a weakness of the team for a few years now, but they really do have playmakers all over the field. Some guys who are underutilized. Senior receiver Noel Thomas is doing well, but beyond that, you could make a case that any other receiver or tight end is being pretty underutilized by the offense. And then with the running backs, Newsome and Ron Johnson, both of them are averaging 3.5 yards per carry. I think, again, that goes back to the offensive line. So we'll see. It's a work in progress. I think the coaches have recognized what they need to do, but they're still figuring out how to do it.
The defense through 3 games, 56th in the nation in total defense, giving up just 138 yards rushing, which isn't outstanding, but 365 against Navy. That's what Navy does. They're always going to roll up rushing yardage against anybody. I would expect, based on the results thus far, that the defense is pretty much up to UConn standards, meaning very gritty, very tough, a sound defense.
Yeah, that would be safe to say for sure. Both of the point totals for Maine in the season opener and Navy in the second game were boosted by defensive touchdowns. Maine scored on a big fumble return, and Navy scored on a short fumble return as well. So, you think if they gave up 14 to Maine, the defense did. They gave up 14 to Maine, 21 to a good Navy team, and then did a really good job against Virginia of holding them to 10. Virginia got those 10 points fairly quickly. And seemed to be moving the ball at will early on, and that changed in the second half. So I think the defense, once again, we can count on it to be fairly stout, so long as they can get enough point support and even just the opportunity to rest, courtesy of the offense. They should have another very strong season.
So, Amon, they're taking on a team this week in Syracuse that defeated Colgate early. The last 2 weeks has been a rough ride for the Orange at home against Louisville, which we found out from their demolition of Florida State is a pretty darn good football team, not just a Lamar Jackson-led football team, but in all facets. And then they get blown out by South Florida this past week, despite leading at 17-0. Dino Babers, his first year at Syracuse, loves to run the up-tempo offense. He wants to throw the ball all over the field, so he's going to try to keep the chains moving so he can keep the pace moving against this UConn defense. So what have you seen out of Syracuse, and what are your causes of concern and hope leading into this one?
Yeah, the Syracuse offense is certainly going to present an interesting clash with UConn's defense. I think, in terms of what they've shown so far, they have offensive weapons. Their receivers, Amba To'o has had a good season so far, really good season so far, very productive in every game. And their quarterback is a legitimate dual threat. He's a legitimate passer, can also make plays with his legs. So that's always something that puts a stress on the defense. UConn's approach in these situations, or really as a whole defensively, is the bend but don't break approach. So really making teams put together sustained drives, multiple 10, 12 play drives in order to put a touchdown together, mitigate the long play. And so as long as the defense is able to do that, it could, be pretty frustrating for Syracuse. But I do think it will be a really, really interesting battle when Syracuse has the ball. When UConn has the ball, Syracuse defense has looked fairly weak and vulnerable so far. And I say that not just because there have been two very good offenses that they've had to face. They're going to be down two starters in their secondary this weekend. And so I think, when we talk about UConn's offense needing to take another step forward, the situation is ripe for them to do so.
In this South Florida loss last week at the Carrier Dome, so the Orange led 17-0. They outgained South Florida 549 to 454, so by about 100 yards, and held the Bulls to 22 minutes of possession time. They kept the ball for 38 minutes versus 22 for South Florida. 30 first downs for Syracuse in this game. They moved the ball all over the field. 3 turnovers to 0. Couldn't cause any turnovers, and that's pretty much the tail of the game. They had a back run for 130 yards, and their quarterback, Eric Dungy, hit on 30 of 48. So a lot of big plays, explosive plays, and they kept the football away, but they turned it over 3 times, and South Florida took advantage. Syracuse and UConn get together on the football field, and the Huskies looking to extend their record to 3-1. Amon Kidwai from Rivals helping us break down the Cuse and the Huskies. Thanks a lot, Amon.
Absolutely, Mark. Thanks for having me.